So what happens when we take a tour of the most haunted place in Canada and run a spirit box with the tour? This one's gonna be long and good.
That's what she said.
So put on some new diapers, hit the like button if you haven't already, subscribe. Let's do this. So for today's video, we're gonna be filming on the GoPro Max, and we're gonna be using the SB7 Spirit Box hooked into a Sony voice recorder. I have a look on my face like I just got hit in the head with a hammer. Okay, so for this haunted tour, we're gonna kind of go guerrilla. I'm gonna be running the spirit box, but instead of coming through a speaker, the spirit box is going to be recorded into this. It's going into the microphone port. So what I'm going to do is time this, and once the tour starts, I'm going to overlay the spirit box. So it's pretty cool. It won't interfere with the tour, and I think this should be really eventful. So I've tried to include every EVP that came through, but there's some that I couldn't understand, and they're going to be represented by those question marks. So if you could use your ears and you hear something I can't, leave it in the comments down below with a timestamp, and I appreciate all the help.
Use 7.
That I don't press a button on this to make it stop. I'll try to check periodically. This should be a very eventful, insightful, knowledgeable tour.
So hello everyone, welcome to the Ghost of Fort Henry Haunted Walk. My name is Lauren. I'll be your guide tonight along a 75-minute walking tour. I'm just getting a feel. I think this is going to be a really great tour tonight. Now, before we add any information or stories on the tour, we need to do extensive research, looking through the libraries, archives, documents, even getting some of our stories from people directly involved. So I'll do my very best tonight to answer as many of your questions. Now, the reason for the establishment of Fort Henry here on Point Henry was due to rising tensions between the Americans and the British around the 1800s. But for thousands and thousands of years before that, these were the traditional lands of the Haudenosaunee and the Wendat Huron nations who used these lands, used these waterways, and we're very fortunate to be using them today. Now, the land we stand on is full of stories, but tonight I will be focusing on the darker side of Fort Henry. Now, you may be wondering, why is the fort haunted? As it doesn't actually have much of a bloodied history. In fact, this fort was never attacked. It never saw battle. Soldiers perished in harsh conditions. Many of them were killed just outside of the fort. But the number one cause of deaths here at Fort Henry were accidents. Very often accidents involving the careless use of artillery. And we do have a very unfortunate story involving a man named Marsh, who was the caretaker of Fort Henry when it stood empty about a century ago. He was in charge of firing off the noon and end of day gun, which sat outside the gates. Now one day he fired off the noon gun, as per usual, but was in a bit of a rush to get to Kingston, figured he'd save himself some time, reload the barrel right away. Except what Marsh failed to consider was that the barrel was still hot from the previous shot. So as he rammed home the second cartridge, there was still enough heat to create a spark. And unlucky for Marsh, it was at that moment that he decided to fire.
Nope.
It's accidents like these that go on to explain the happenings here at the fort. And in fact, the fort has gained a reputation as one of the most haunted places in Canada. In fact, in 2009, when the TV show Ghost Hunters ventured up north, they said it was one of the creepiest places they had ever been. Several TikTok and YouTube creators have also visited the fort, seeking out evidence of the paranormal, leaving with far more than they bargained for. But as we make our way tonight, I'd like to mention, here at the Haunted Walk, we do our very best to keep you safe, but ultimately, your safety is your responsibility. It is a very urgent certification. Very good care of yourselves. And I also like to see some head nods to confirm everyone take care. Yes, these are legally binding head nods. Let's make our way into Fort Henry.
Looks beautiful.
Of course, there's a beaver tails here.
Walking into the house and walking into the middle. I feel like that would be a good part of being Oh cow!
Built for the War of 1812. If you're interested in learning about Fort's military and architectural history, I highly recommend coming during the daytime. They offer excellent programming, parades, demonstrations. The Fort Henry Guard does a great job of representing the British military regiment from 1867. The reason why I'm giving it such high praise is because I also work here during the daytime. I basically live here. So as well, if you have any questions about the military architectural history at all, feel free to ask me. I brought you here because in this area, there's been a common sighting by members of the Fort Henry Guard, paranormal investigators, and even guests from around stores have often seen a soldier staggering as though badly injured or drunk. You see, one of the earliest sightings was many years ago. A senior member of the Guard was doing after-hours searches through the dining rooms. Usually, when the fort had been searched and closed and everyone was gone, he would move from room to room in the dark, looking for any cigarettes or candles that had been left alight. Usually during these checks, he felt quite uncomfortable, feeling the hair on the back of his neck stand up, feeling unseen eyes watching him. But one night was different than the rest. You see, being a member of the Fort Henry Guard, he was used to seeing people dressed up in uniform. So when a soldier with a big heavy beard and a midnight blue bombardier's uniform passed by the window, he didn't think anything of it until he realized the doors were locked. The entire fort had been searched for stragglers. No one should be here. It could have been his own reflection. He was in his civilian clothing. He watched as the soldier made his way staggering.
Led to the moment. They watched him make his way marching along the parade square in the lower fort. He marched when a woman looked over and said, "What's in that window?" Everyone turned to see a dark figure standing in the window. He didn't do anything at first, but then shifted and vanished. Now, in the 1960s, some senior members of the Guard were having an after-hours board meeting down in the lower fort. Now, all witnesses confirmed that they saw a soldier pass by the window. They didn't get a good look at his face. Just ice.
Great pride in the care of their uniforms. So naturally, seeing this unkempt soldier, they had to go and reprimand him. They watched as he entered the room next door. They too followed in, but found the room empty. There are no other exits. There's not even a window you can fit through. No physical explanation. Now we have an idea as to who this wandering ghost may be, as the torn and disheveled uniform may be a sign of a drunken night at the pubs in Kingston, and then having to sleep outside of the gates after curfew when it's locked. Now in those days, public drunkenness was taken very seriously and punished very harshly. Often soldiers would have to perform drill for hours and hours in the blazing hot sun, back and forth along the parade square. We actually have a soldier on record dropping dead from that punishment. Perhaps that soldier is our wandering ghost, still marching on, still looking for a quiet place to rest. And now let us make our way deeper into Fort Henry.
She might be arrested.
Hi. How are you?
ditch. Now on your way to Fort Henry, you would have noticed that the fort is actually not built on the hill, but dug into the hill, just so that approaching enemy lines certainly would not notice the large ditches that surround it and find themselves falling a 30-foot drop. Now once landing in here, you have to then face the rifle loopholes that surround the entirety of the dry ditch. And to make matters even worse, at the far corners of the fort are reverse firing chambers, spaces in the wall.
And the rush.
The curved walls and ricochet everywhere here in the dry ditch. Essentially, this area was designed to make survival very slim. Now, even before reaching the fort, there were many dangers for both soldiers and civilians. You see, most of you, to get to Fort Henry today, you probably drove across the LaSalle Causeway or the Robin Crossing. But ages ago, those bridges did not exist. The only way of getting from the mainland to here was on a wooden ferry with no hand railings. Often this ferry became quite overcrowded, especially after the last call for pubs. And in those days, not many people knew how to swim. Now, in fact, drownings became so frequent and such an issue in Kingston that the wealthy riverfront landowners began to complain about the number of dead bodies washing up on their lawns. Now, in those days, Kingston did not have a proper morgue. Their solution was to tie each of the bodies together with a rope and allow it to float in the harbor so someone could come, identify, and claim them. Now, someone did manage to survive the crossing, while a careless civilian or soldier would find themselves contending with these ditches that surround the fort and could find themselves falling and injuring themselves, possibly fatally. See, we do have a story from about 1838, a gunner named John Smith. Yes, John Smith, that was actually his name. He was working with one of the large guns up on the inner wall, and he was using a paper cartridge. Now, paper cartridges were very dangerous because they were notorious for tearing. Unlucky for him, his was torn, so the gun ignited before he was clear, his body was thrown across, hit the outer wall, fell the 30-foot drop, and he lay dying in the dry ditch for 6 long hours. Perhaps Gunner Smith is one of the spirits still lurking around the fort today. And as we make our way through the fort, I would like to encourage you to take photos. See if you capture one of our ghosts. Guests on our tours have captured things before. On my own tours, I've had people come up to me at the end going, can you explain this? And I try. Believe me, I try to come up with an explanation, and I can't. I simply cannot. As well, if you do happen to catch something, don't be shy. Feel free to share on Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, or TikTok, and do tag us at Haunted Walk. As well, if you'd like to take a photo with me or my lantern, or me and my lantern together, it's for a package deal. Go right ahead. You can ask as well. The only thing I do ask for videos specifically, you're welcome to take videos. Just try not to get recording of story, of my voice telling the story specifically. We don't want spoilers. And yes, I know this is funny.
Babies, yeah, underneath it. Haunted bunny. Oh. So it's not haunted, it's just a bunny?
Under the
On the chairs, make sure you're comfortable. It is nice, make sure everyone's comfy. Oh, sorry. Didn't see that. I'm so sorry. Wait a minute.
Tuck into the corner.
Okay, everyone's comfy? Maybe not anymore? This room here is the officer's here. An officer with big heavy beard, dressed in a black military uniform and a cap. And he likes to sit at this table. Very often guests from up
on the ramparts have looked down to this room and seen this officer sitting at his desk. They watch as he rises, makes his way to the door, but no one has ever seen him emerge. Now, it was about in 2001, during our Halloween tours, we had an off-duty tour guide just going around. It was a day off, he was going around taking some photos. Now he was up on the ramparts, looked down at this room, and saw an officer sitting at the desk. Now he thought it was just one of our guides dressed up as an officer. Took a photo, made his way down, came over to this room, entered, but found no one in here. So he went around to his fellow guides and said, okay, who was it dressed as an officer in the officer's guard room? Ha ha, very funny. Except every single one of them assured they hadn't even been near this room. Later when the photo was developed, you would clearly see someone in the window. Now, it was about 2017 when we had a tour up on the ramparts, and the guide asked everyone to look down to the room, see if they could see anything. And two women from opposite sides both spoke up saying, yes, there's a man in that room. The night prior, Chilling made a similar experience. The guide started to tell her story when she noticed one woman getting very noticeably upset, visibly upset. That there was someone sitting in this room staring at the group. Now, often when we tell our story in this room, guests notice an additional member. A man sitting amongst the group, listening very, very quietly. Except when the light comes back on. He's not there anymore. So do keep an eye on your neighbor. He may not be there when the light comes back. What you do? Good. Let's make our way into the heart of Fort Henry.
You okay, Alex?
Person.
What is that?
Henry. This is the lower fort, and behind me, this is the parade square. This is where the drum corps plays their tunes, the drill squad practices their military maneuvers, and the artillery fire off their guns. But it's also the site of many strange noises. You see, it was many years ago when there was a security guard up in the advanced battery doing his rounds. Now, he started to hear voices coming from the lower fort. It was strange, it was late, it was after hours, no one should be here. So he made his way down to the archway and was listening, hearing these voices bouncing around, when suddenly, from across at the schoolroom, he heard crystal clear the sound of shattering glass. He could get called out, whoever was there better make themselves known, the doors were locked, and he radioed for backup. His partner came, the two listened to these voices bouncing around, shattering glass coming from all around the fort. So they called the police, who sent several officers to the scene. They searched the entire fort. Found nothing. Came up empty-handed. So the officers had a little chuckle to themselves, suggested the security guard. However, the noises started again. More voices, more shattering glass, this time with racing footsteps going back and forth along the parade square. It was only after pleading with the police that they sent two officers back to the scene. Once again, the entire fort was searched. Nothing. Nothing was here. So the four men started to make their way to leave the fort. They had reached just about that archway when just 20 or 30 feet behind them, crystal clear, shattering glass. The officers spun around, drawing their guns, shouting into the darkness, and once again, for a third time, the entire fort was searched. There was nowhere anyone could go. And it was left a mystery as the four men left the fort, locking up early. But later, they had a psychic come to the fort, see if she could find anything, and she did. She said, in fact, there were 5 spirits here. 4 of them very active and quite friendly. But the 5th one was angry, violent, and taking it out on the security guards. She said that the spirit had been disturbed by some construction at the base of the stairs by the men's locker room. But she had no way of knowing
was just a few months prior, the floor in that exact spot had been dug up to pour fresh concrete. Now we had an idea to who this noisy spirit may be, and a man named John McCullough, who was hanged on the hill outside of Fort Henry in 1835. Up for roll call. So some soldiers were sent to Kingston to go find him and arrest him. They found him. But as they went to arrest him, he got very angry, violent. He started to curse, shout at the soldiers. He stood up, he grabbed a stick and hit one of them, grabbed his bayonet and stabbed him. And that soldier died of his wounds, and for that John McCullough was hanged. Perhaps he is the one still causing the noises in the fort to this day. Let's make our way further.
Why we
Lauren, what are all these along here? Are these rooms or
The
cells,
rooms?
or-
So, a lot of the rooms originally would have been barracks rooms, officers' quarters, soldiers' quarters. A lot of them today are museum rooms. Most of the ones on this side, however, are the change rooms, the office and stuff for the Fort Henry Guard to this day. So I just want to direct your attention quickly to these two doors over here. There's one here in the corner, so the officers' quarters 11. The one next to it across from me is officers' quarters 10. In 11, that is where the after-hours board meeting was held in the 1960s. 10 right here is where the wandering ghost disappeared. I've personally been in that room more times than I can even count. There are no doors, not even a window you can fit through. There is nowhere you can go. But we are now going to make our way up to the ramparts of Fort Henry, the roof. I'd like to mention first, quite steep and a little bit uneven, so just be careful as you go, as well as up there, some of the tiles, they do wobble a little bit. Don't worry, it's a very old fort, as I mentioned, but do be careful, however, of the gun carriages sticking out. I don't want anyone hitting their heads. Now, an additional thing I always like to put in there and mention, if you don't like spiders and are arachnophobic like me, sometimes they like to live on the railings, going along. And it's early enough in the evening that
Now,
nonetheless, let's make our way up.
Well, if you don't want a spider, I don't mind spiders.
they're grabbing all the spiders. Don't worry about it. You're fine now.
Almost as steep.
I hope so.
More narrow, I think.
That is everyone. Okay. Don't get too comfy. We're continuing along.
online.
Oh, really?
So now I'm just going to ask all of you to step up so that you can look over the wall. The only thing I ask is that you do not climb onto the wall or onto any cannons. I don't need you to go for it. Little test. So now as you look out over the wall,
tower, the red group. That is half covered out.
Haunting.
Now, Cedar Island is a very popular camping spot and one of our most well-known haunts. And the story I'm about to tell you, well, put it simply, I'm going to tell it to you the same way people who experienced it told us. You see, it was the 1990s when two couples were camping on the island. They knew for certain they were the only ones there, so they pitched their tents right away. First couple set up their tent just next to the path, while the other couple felt more adventurous, went closer to the tower, to a little embankment built over the water. Now that night, the woman in the tent down by the path, when she woke up and discovered a horrible storm outside. There was rain, thunder, lightning, and unlucky for her, nature called. So she had to go out and brave the storm, but along her way back, she noticed something strange. She saw the other couple walking hand in hand toward the tower. Now the strangest part was their clothing. It was very old-fashioned looking. She'd never seen it before. And when she called out to them, they didn't turn around, simply just kept walking. So she returned to her tent, woke up her partner, explained what she had seen, and he agreed that that was quite strange, but there was nothing they could really do at that exact moment, so best to go to sleep and handle it in the morning. So the next day, they approached the couple and said, "What were you doing out in that storm, and what were you thinking?" But the other couple looked confused. They said that they hadn't left their tent the entire night. In fact, as they looked in the area around them, there was no sign of storm damage. There wasn't even a puddle. The clothing that the woman had been wearing the night before was bone dry. Finding this into the history of Cedar Island to see if they could find an answer. And they did. Now, that waterway, Dead Man's Bay, gets its name from a horrible accident in 1846. You see, there was 23 men on the island working on the construction of Cape Redoubt, the Martello Tower. Now, they saw a storm approaching in the distance, but figured they had enough time to wrap up their work and make it back to the mainland. But they were mistaken. Suddenly, the storm was all around them. Rain, thunder, lightning, crashing waves. And all 23 men were forced to pile into a rowboat, only meant to hold 12. They began to furiously paddle towards shore. But 17 of them lost their lives in the water that night. Among them was a man named Robert James, who was engaged to a woman named Elizabeth, the daughter of an innkeeper. She wouldn't sleep. Each night she would wade out into the water, up to her waist, waiting for her sweetheart's return. And soon after, she suddenly died. So we do believe that the spirits of Robert and Elizabeth reunited once more on Cedar Island. And that is the most sweetest story you will hear all night. The rest of the get creepier. Realize is an identical structure once stood there out on the hill. Those were the gallows that hanged a man named Nils von Schultz. Now Nils von Schultz was a bit of a lesser man from Finland who had gotten involved in some revolutions in Poland as a young man. Later he turned his sights to the United States, to a group called the Hunters Lodges. See, the Hunters Lodges were gathering people to eventually invade Canada, believing that we were ripe for rebellion. It was time to break free from the oppressive British regime here. We simply needed a spark where thousands would rise up and join them. However, they were greatly misled and misguided, as this area has always been very much a loyalist stronghold. When Nils von Schultz and his some 200 men showed up just east of Kingston,
You're missing out on life.
Oh my goodness. This is really tiny. What? It's kind of creepy. Yes, it is. It's creepy. Oh my God. We're definitely being led into a dungeon. And I hate it. Yeah, you think other people like it?
Yes, I actually do.
Look, it's a garbage can barrel. Where'd your mom and dad go? They disappeared. They're gone. Right here.
We're back. Yeah, you're 100% right. Your hair looks red in this light.
Whacked my head in the stairwell.
Again?
Yes, at least twice a year. It's my quota. You like that?
Okay, so now we're going to start to make our way into the old officers' quarters, into the museum rooms of Fort Henry. A few things to note: in some of the areas could be a little bit darker, so it may take a moment for your eyes to adjust at some points, as well as some of the doorways going along are a little bit lower, so do be careful of your head, please. Also, if you'd like to take photos of the museum rooms and the artifacts themselves, feel free to do so, just please don't use flash. It's to protect the artifacts. Let's make our way in.
We've been this year, and there was like low levels of security or off.
Yeah. Watch your head.
There's showers and stuff. Look really. Oh, shit, that's crap. Probably somebody's good.
So I'll just make sure to keep moving into the room, please, so everyone can get in.
Window and I took
I promise the rooms later get a little bit bigger. If you all just make sure to continue to squish in. Great chance to make friends. I like to say. So the rooms along this hallway are said to look like officers' quarters from 1867. This one I can tell you specifically is that of a lieutenant's room. This is also where Nils von Schultz spent his final days before his execution. Now, there have been many indicators that he is still here today, as members of the Fort Henry Guard have come into this room to see that rocking chair moving back and forth on its own as though someone was sitting in it. I had a coworker 2 years ago who came in here and saw that chair moving. Others have seen a floating blue or white orb hovering above the chair, not moving, not making any noise, but simply giving off an unwelcoming presence. Now, at one point, ages ago, members of the Fort Henry Guard had crossed this entire room to reach the lights, and they assured us that this was quite an unnerving part of their job. Now, guests in our tours have also felt this unwelcoming presence. We once had a family visiting from Germany. They brought their young daughter on the tour. Upon entering this room, she became horribly sick, absolutely ill. They got her outside quickly to get some fresh air. Instantly felt better. She had no other instances for the rest of the night, and her parents said it was something in this room. Another time we had a family who brought their young boy on the tour. Upon entering this room, he said that he felt hands pushing down on his chest, making it hard to breathe. As soon as he left the room, nothing. Instantly better.
Now, guests on our tours have also felt this. I had a guest on one of my tours just last year standing, actually, Piper, you're standing, and she told me that she said she felt a hand gripping, squeezing her arm. Now, part of Fort Henry Guard programming, they have overnight stays. Often students or usually cadet groups. They stay at the fort, they join the British Army for a day, and they sleep over in the barracks rooms. Part of this programming is they're told ghost stories. They're told that there is a haunted room along this hallway, but they're not told which one. They lead them from room to room to room, letting them get a feel, gather them later in one of the other rooms, and go, okay, we'll have it to evoke now. There's nothing very special about this room. It's quite unassuming. But almost year after year, almost every single student votes for this room. Now, my sister, who actually used to work with Haunted Walk and currently works with Fort Henry Guard to this day, she led one of these overnight programs. She was dressed up as a soldier, led the group room to room to room, gathered them further along. Now, she's also a teacher, and she knows sometimes that kids sometimes like to vote with their friends. So to keep things completely anonymous, she'd have them close their eyes, put their heads down on the tables, and cover their faces like this. As each room is called. There were 51 kids on this tour. 49 of them raised their hands for this room. Now, for those of you who watched the Ghost Hunters episode before coming to the fort, you would have seen that they did a test and found that when they knocked 3 times on this glass, they received a knock back. Now, we offer the same opportunity to all of our guests, and one time we did give this opportunity, but most people just simply continued along the hallway, didn't really want to, but one boy stayed behind. Moments later, he came racing down the hallway, sobbing, completely inconsolable. He had to stay behind to knock on the glass. And he said he felt it shake with a single knockback. So now I will offer all of you this same opportunity, but I do warn you that if you do receive a knock back, don't tell me, I like my job.
Actually, heard some.
Do they still? Huh? Do they still? Yes. Almost said this that red light, but then I said it's still easy light.
I mentioned I work for Fort Henry Guard, 9 to 5. I'm hearing boots steel plates. I cannot unhear the steel plates. I hear them in my sleep. I was standing here and I just kept hearing them click.
Conversations.
It took me a moment to continue. So now I always take a listen from here. I hope it looks like the dark.
Looks like we're actually gonna use these now. Maybe.
Thanks, guys.
Conversation.
That was quite clever.
everyone from the hallway?
No.
Like I said, I don't want any ghost tours. Sorry, so much to learn. So we are now in the wine cellar. Now, I'll tell you, unfortunately, the barrels are empty to this day. We don't offer any wine tastings. But I can tell you for certain that this is the second most secured and fortified room in the entire fortification. So the British, their priorities clear. But I would be cautious of yourself in this room, as people have heard knocking from within the limestone walls. I had a coworker last year who heard knocking in that corner for about a minute straight. People have heard footsteps outside the room. I'll tell some of you who were at the front of the group that I heard footsteps down the hall outside of this room just last month. And I would keep an eye on that doorway. The door has a bit of a go throughout the route, making sure doors are open, lights are off, the way is clear. One time a guide was coming through and found that door shut. It's quite odd, but she had some time. Her group was still knocking on the glass. She would simply open it. But the door wouldn't budge. She jostled the handle, put her shoulder into it. Nothing. Wouldn't move. Now, she wasn't upset about this. Usually she felt quite uncomfortable telling the story inside the wine cellar. Would simply tell it from the outside. So as the rest of the group caught up, she explained, sorry folks, we usually tell a story in the wine cellar, but we got to tell it out here because, well, as you can see, it's locked. But as she reached for the handle to prove to them it was locked, before she even touched the handle, the door swung open. So she let her group in, but kept a close eye on their exit. And this happens quite often. Our guides come through, find the door shut, unable to be opened. They leave it, they continue. By the time the next group has come along, it's open when no one has been by. Now last year, 2024, we had a guide in this room telling her story, as per usual, but she noticed something very strange. You see, one of her guests was continuously not looking at her, but above her head. Now, it got to a point when she was like, hey, is everything all right? Is there a spider above me? Like, what is everything all right? Not nothing. As when they were leaving at the end of the night, the guest approached the guide and said, I didn't want to scare you at the time, but your shadow on the wall.
In a difficult.
This story is true, as I was the first person to hear it, because that guide is my sister. Now, will we all keep a close eye on our shadows tonight, ensure they're not playing tricks on us. Let's make our way out of the wine cellar.
That's very nice. Where is this? Oh, these are just. No. The door closed. Three holes.
Just make sure not to look down.
Over.
please let me know. I have a printed version of the story. I can give it to you. The rest of us will head down. You will read it up here, alone. But truthfully, if someone does actually need this, please let me know now. Speak now, forever hold your peace. You're all quite brave. I'll be honest with you. I'm actually quite nervous to go down there. Not last night, the night prior, 2 nights ago, I had a tour here. And when I was down in the room telling the story, you'll notice when we go down there, it's quite chilly, that's because of the limestone. I was in the middle of telling my story when the strangest thing happened to me. I became instantly warm, I started to sweat, and my mind blanked. And I completely froze. I was unable to keep talking. That has never happened to me before. I noticed some of my guests, as I was talking, they kept looking in the corner behind them. When we came up here, I told everyone, this just happened to me, and it's very strange, like I don't know what just happened. Those 2 guests told me that, yeah, they felt like someone was behind them. There was nothing but a wall. And they felt that force shift from behind them to behind me. Let's make our way down.
Can you hold this?
What?
The battery's almost dead.
Are you guys going down? Yeah. We're gonna go behind. You're gonna stay back? No, we're gonna go left. Catch up, buddy.
Why are we left?
So I'll be backing up and we'll run it back up.
Asbestos.
There's usually water on these.
Okay, close the doors.
What's the hole on the left here?
This hatch might be closed.
Watch it.
I was thinking Rachel and Lee is on here, but I don't know what Liam.
Oh my God, easy. Get up the bend over.
Well, that's it. So I don't know if he's like
I think he does like this one to see what the tour's like, so we'll tour you around. I was on that tour, and when we were making our way down the stairs from the ramparts, there was a door open on the balcony, and I don't know what it was, I just glanced over, and I saw someone run by in a midnight blue bombardier's uniform. And now I'm working here. Is that everyone? Okay. So now some of you may have heard rumors or stories of tunnels that lead from Fort Henry to City Hall, to the Martilla Towers, to the pubs of Kingston. And even though that would be great if there were tunnels leading from here to the pubs of Kingston, but I can tell you these are not true. The only tunnels are this one, it's a twin on the opposing side, and the 2 leading out of the privies, the toilets. But I brought you to this one specifically, this reverse firing chamber. This chamber specifically with this window. Because this is the site of the most famous prisoner escape in Fort Henry in its history.
You see, about 15 prisoners were being held here for their part in the Upper Canada rebellions of 1838. For taking up arms and taking part in the rebellion, they were certainly going to be hanged. Now, that same year, several people had recently been captured and hanged at the old jail, including certain members from the Battle of the Windmill, like Nils von Schultz and his men. No connection there. And hangings that year went horribly. One in specific, a man named Martin Woodruff was hanged in front of a crowd of about 200 people. His hanging went terribly. You see, the noose around his neck had not been properly tied. So when he dropped from the gallows, he didn't die. He simply dangled in his and his suffering. But from the improperly tied noose was not an experienced executioner, as he instead climbed up the gallows, pulled up on the rope, and dropped him over and over again. Oh my God. It took 4 drops before he finally died. With an ending like this to come, provides great incentive and motivation to escape. So one stormy night, a man named John Montgomery led the other 14 prisoners. They managed to break out of the room they were being held in, got down to these tunnels, got to this chamber, busted open that window, and John Montgomery led the charge leaping through. Except what he didn't realize is there's a large ditch on the outside of these openings. So as he jumped through, he fell and broke his leg. United States, and later were pardoned and allowed to return to Canada. But that isn't the most interesting part of the story that I want to tell you about. I want to tell you about John Montgomery himself and his trial. You see, John Montgomery, he was a tavern owner of Montgomery's Tavern on Yonge Street in Toronto. And he actually never took up arms during the Upper Canada rebellions. His tavern was the site of the Battle of Montgomery's Tavern, but he only provided food and drink for those who stayed at his tavern. And yet he was being given the same punishment to be executed at the gallows as those who took up arms. So at his final trial, he rose up in front of everyone and he said, "I have not been given a fair trial. There are witnesses here who have sworn my life away. These perjurers shall never die a natural death. And when you, sir, and the jury shall all have died and perished in hell's flames, John Montgomery shall yet be living on Yonge Street." John Montgomery lived to the age of 96. These were the 1800s. People did not live to 96. He outlived every member of his trial, and none of them died a natural death. Perhaps there was some truth to Montgomery's curse, and to this day our guides come into this tunnel starting to tell the story when people begin to hear footsteps racing into this direction. You hear them all of a sudden reach this window, and the racing and the shouts of men are heard out in the dry ditch. Perhaps this is John Montgomery and his men. One of my tours, I was standing at the top of the staircase. I just finished explaining to be careful as we go down. Everyone said, "Let's go." When down in the tunnels behind me, I heard clearly in gravel one single stomp. There was no one else down here. Nothing that could have made that noise. Well, nothing physical. And now we're going to make our way back out. I shall lead the way up. Argue amongst yourselves who gets to be last. No.
Yes, it was like half on fun.
Yep.
No, not this part coming up.
don't count staircases very well. Clean laundry down there. Yes, you're good in that way. Spot your head there.
Now we are now in the schoolroom of Fort Henry. This is where the boys and girls came for the lessons each day. It's also the most haunted hallway and haunted room on Fort Henry's grounds. You might recall from my story earlier that this is where the shattered glass was first heard. Now people come through this room to feel as though someone was watching them, hearing footsteps, feeling as though the hair on the back of their neck is standing up. Sometimes people even heard the tune of a music box drifting down the hall. Its song is anything but soothing. One time we had a guy doing their ritual checks. They just turned out the light of bakery. Approaching from behind. And the guy slowly turned around and was met with the disembodied face of a man floating in the darkness. He was terrified and raced out of the room, heading back up the advanced battery, but on his way up, he suddenly heard something strange. He heard a whistle, his name being called. And then suddenly, the door slammed shut. That is the most terrifying story I have for you in this room. As in 2016, we had a guide telling the final story over the bakery. It was approaching about midnight. As she was telling her story, a woman standing in the connecting doorway let out a scream. She said,
So that pretty much wraps up anything that came through that I felt was significant. If you stuck around this long, I want to thank you for watching, as well as your help translating. I really had fun doing this trip, and I can't wait to do more like this. So stay tuned.